Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Not Another Tooling Podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my wonderful co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. I must say though, it's now Matt Malcolm Brown. Just to put that out there. All right.
You need to update your your name
You
on
know what I
here
do?
then.
I do. I didn't do that. I've done my LinkedIn. I've got a bunch of other stuff to do as well, which will take its own time.
Very cool. It's our first live of the new year. Did you have a good break? Christmas?
Yeah, I did.
I've forgotten all about it now.
Nah, I think I was intending to get more work done, if I'm honest, and it just naturally didn't happen for a number of reasons. But I think, to be frank, probably needed a break, so I don't feel so bad. But I'm kind of ready to get back stuck in.
Excellent. And this week we have a wonderful special guest, Mr. Richard Simon. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hey guys, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Right, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. I think I bumped into you. I'm going to say it's at least 2 years ago. I think we were at a Forrester event talking about ops, I think it was.
Yes.
And you were doing your own podcast, which you can shamelessly plug today. Yeah, Cloud Therapist. Go check it out. We'll remind people later on. But yeah. But you were talking to me about your work as CTO at T-Systems at the time.
That's right.
So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to our wonderful audience?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Richard Simon. I work as a Chief Technology Officer at T-Systems. T-Systems is part of Deutsche Telekom. I've been there for coming up to 3 years actually now. I've been in the industry for far longer than I care to remember. I think like 35 years or something. I think actually this is going to be 35 years or something like that. So quite a long time. Done different types of roles, everything from sort of systems engineering to architecture, cloud architecture, to consulting and principal consulting, and now obviously a CTO. And all of really my career has been kind of really with vendors. So, working with vendors on cutting edge technologies, everybody from the likes of IBM to SUSE, Mirantis, and Worldwide Technology, Concino, and obviously now T-Systems as well. And obviously, I tend to be quite an opinionated person, and sort of hence why I've kind of got an outlet for my views with the Cloud Therapist YouTube channel, and that's kind of really where you see me, ranting on about various things with guests or doing solo stuff as well.
Yeah, I've seen some of the very adventurous ones where you've been out to events and doing live stuff from KubeCon and stuff like that, which we've not got to yet, but maybe that's an idea for the future, Matt.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, I think we definitely planned. I planned, whether or not I transferred that thought to you, the idea of doing some physical type event at some point. So I think we will. I'm not sure what that will look like. If people are interested, let us know. But some sort of small gathering, same kind of format, but maybe we'll have a few different people on different topics. That's a thought process at the moment, not executed in any way, shape, or form, but I think it's on the horizon.
Yeah, sounds fun. Right, let's dive into this week's topic then. As we have Mr. Cloud Therapist, we're talking all things cloud tooling today. So we'll start at the very beginning. Customers who are early on their cloud journey, are there different tooling considerations for cloud versus on-prem and legacy stuff? And I say this with a slightly biased opinion of having seen people try and use some of their on-premise tooling in the cloud and it not go particularly well. But you're the master at this, so tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there will be changes as you migrate to cloud, and I mean, I guess the easiest one is you may end up using some of the tools that are provided to you by the cloud service provider or hyperscaler, as we like to call them in T-Systems. So the hyperscalers have their own tools. Obviously, they're there to help you, and make the journey, the migration, and the journey easier, and obviously to adopt more and more of their services. So all of those will have their own tooling. If you've been doing some open source tools, I guess, in your own sort of data center, then potentially those can come across, and you can continue to make use of those. Obviously, there will be potentially changes or differences in terms of how you do that going forward, because the whole sort of design and architecture going from the data center will change as you go into cloud. I think for very biased reasons, I think HashiCorp does a great job of explaining what some of the subtle changes are. So I would advise you looking at the HashiCorp's cloud operating model, and they describe kind of the four big ones. But essentially, your networking and your security are the two main changes that you'll need to make as you migrate your apps into the cloud. So yeah, definitely tooling will change at that point.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen there's often a difference in the real-time nature of monitoring in the cloud versus on-prem, right? A lot of legacy systems don't move around that much, whereas in the cloud, everything moves a lot, particularly these days, with containers that are spinning up and down all the time, sort of thing. And if you look at things like, the way we used to do things like CMDB, for example, where you might do an overnight scan, and then it might take a couple of days to reconcile with your CMDB and up to
a couple of days. What CMDB team are you working with? It's not in my shop.
I'm just saying what I hear from many organizations, but yeah, depends on the size of the stuff. But obviously that's useless in the cloud world, right? You need to know instantly where things are. If you've got a problem, you need to be able to spot that straight away, and having that kind of legacy view is very different.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. This sort of thing is, you can't just kind of say, okay, well, we'll just choose that tool, or we'll continue with this tool, as we go into cloud. It needs to be part of a wider consideration of your cloud strategy or operating model as you move into a public cloud environment. So the tooling will definitely kind of change. You need to consider things like your skills, that kind of strategy in terms of how you deal with everyday sort of operations that you would do, because your operations and processes will obviously change as well, because you're not just technically having to deal with a different environment, but you just how that environment behaves and operates is going to be different from kind of how you do things in the data center. So definitely, yeah, all of that is stuff to consider.
Superb. I think kind of leading on from that, another thing that I often find is that when people started in the cloud, people who were earlier on the cloud journey, because most people have got something these days, and they might have got in 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. But what have you seen has changed since, in the last 5 to 10 years, that people need to think about in the way they may have to approach tooling slightly differently, or any new technologies that they need to adopt or something like that?
Yes, obviously there's a lot of water under the bridge when it comes to sort of cloud. It's matured, substantially in the last sort of probably 8 years or so. So the number of and types of services that you can now get, and especially now with the advent of things like generative AI and so on, there's a lot more of that sort of capability now being announced pretty much every year by the top the big three hyperscalers. So the tooling has got more sophisticated, but I think it's also got a lot easier as well. Those, like I said, those hyperscaler tools have increased in sophistication and capability, and also, they're sort of they're a lot more widespread as well. So you could potentially use some of those tools to manage multiple clouds as well. So if you're in a multi-cloud environment, so if you're in, let's say Microsoft or and as well as Amazon, then you should be able to have some of the tooling, make use of some of the tooling to address both of those environments. So the tools have got more sophisticated, but then again, also on the open source side and just the off-the-shelf tooling, that's also increased in terms of sophistication and capability to really match the technology and the sophistication, the level and the type of services that we're seeing from the hyperscalers as well. So I think that's kind of quite matched in terms of sort of capability. And obviously you kind of need to, as I said, part of that larger strategy, you need to kind of see which tools would be more appropriate for you, and that's where you could potentially look at avoiding things like lock-in and stuff like that, which can be a concern for certain organizations.
Yeah.
Do you ever see in your scenarios, Richard, because obviously tooling as a whole can be super rabbit hole territory and a bit of a bird's nest. Do you ever see scenarios where organizations are almost hesitant to go into the cloud because of the tooling specific issues? Or is it more like they're just expecting that the tooling will be in there and they're working and that's an afterthought?
I think I see it more as a resistance in terms of the culture. That tends to be a resisting factor. I think the tooling kind of appears when you start looking at the skills of your IT team. So if they're skilled and certified in sort of data center technology like virtualization and storage and networking and security and so on, there's obviously, as we said, certain types of tools there, and those are not necessarily all transferable to the public cloud. So that's, I think, where we see the barrier for tooling, rather than the actual tools themselves, or you having to learn a new tool. I mean, you learn a new tool, you go and do some training, you do some labs, and you do some certification, and then you get hands-on on it to actually learn the skill. But the approach to that, and then the difference between that type of tooling and the tooling that we have in the data center is, I think, where where we see the difference and the resistance.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. What do you see is currently changing at the moment that seems to be making a big difference? And one thing that I know you and I have talked about before is repatriation, right? There's a lot of how much the reality there is behind this, but there were plenty of organizations that jumped into the cloud thinking it'll be cheaper, versus actually I get access to all this cool tech in real time that can give me some competitive advantage, and now they're going, hang on a minute, it's actually costing me a bit more money, I'm not saving money, so I want to jump back in house. I mean, certainly I see a lot of that being posted around on social media. I'm not sure I see much of that in reality, but I don't know. What's your view there?
I mean, specifically on cloud repatriation, the reasons have been is that initially, when kind of cloud became a thing and you could actually go there, it became a sort of a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises adopted the cloud first sort of approach. So everything was considered to go into cloud, first as your sort of next project or next solution or whatever you wanted to implement. So we saw a lot of that kind of go into the cloud. The cloud itself has a number of what I would call stages. There's kind of 4 stages for your migration into cloud. So depending on kind of where you are, it will depend on that will depend on kind of where you land really on those 4 stages. So they get everything from sort of a lift and shift, which is kind of a stage 1, all the way to very sophisticated, serverless microservices approach, kind of a stage 4, and various other things in between. So that cloud first was kind of one of the reasons. The other reason more recently was kind of the pandemic and the lockdowns and so on. A lot of organizations need to really mobilize and make their workloads more easily accessible. We had now the whole workforce working from home, so how do we make that available to them and furnish them with not just equipment but also access back to to those business applications. So those were, I think, the reasons. And now we're potentially seeing a so-called sort of a backlash of that to look at how we can actually make our cloud environment a lot more cost effective. So some people are actually talking about potentially maybe even doing some taking back some of those workloads. But I think those are, for me, I'm not sort of 100% convinced that cloud repatriation is a thing, and it's actually a major thing that's happening. And I'll maybe detail some reasons on that shortly. But certainly, I think if you don't plan your migration into cloud properly and have that operating model and strategy and approach and so on, and as we said, the kind of the skilling that we mentioned earlier on as well, then yes, you're kind of potentially asking for trouble there, and certain aspects of what you've migrated will not be optimized and therefore will not be cost effective, and therefore you're looking at a much higher bill. And also, when you're in the cloud, you really need, it's a journey kind of moving into cloud and kind of getting your services into the cloud. So you really need to continue the journey. You can't just say, okay, we've landed, we moved everything from the data center into the cloud, that's it, we're done. We can close the door on that migration journey. The actual migration journey needs to continue. You need to get more sophisticated and utilize more of the cloud services in order to take full advantage of your presence really in the cloud, and all the other kind of advantages of that, flexibility and scalability and time to value and all those other things will come in only if you really take those further steps and continue in that journey. So repatriation itself, again, I mean, if you look at a lot of the stuff that's in the press, they always mention the main 3 or 4 stories that go around, and everybody mentions these. So you'll hear the story from 37 Signals. You'll hear the story of Amazon Video or Prime Video. And Geico, I think, is one of the other stories as well. And these circulate around. Everybody mentions these 3. Now, the press keeps on saying, "Oh, this is a major thing. It's kind of epidemic proportions and various other things." And my simple question to that is, if that is the case, then where are the other stories in terms of really large sort of conglomerates and corporations doing the same thing? How about UBS or Barclays or Deutsche Bank or any of these kind of other major sort of corporations actually doing that as well? Are they kind of on that repatriation sort of journey as well? And the answer I always get is in response to that question is, well, this is a kind of an embarrassing thing, so nobody's going to really talk about it in the public. And then my immediate response back to that is, well, if we don't know that those stories are not public, then how do we know it's such a major pandemic or epidemic of movement back to the data center? We can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, there's a whole movement here, and then not be able to to provide those stories and use cases. And not have some kind of backing to in terms of figures for that information. So yes, I mean, as I said, if you don't really plan your strategy for cloud and continue on that journey, your costs will potentially increase because you're not optimizing your workloads and so on. But at the same time, we can't just say, well, let's just give up on that and move back to the data center. My strategy would be, no, let's move further into the cloud. Let's optimize what we're doing, which will incur an initial cost, but you will see savings from that and flexibility from that as you move further into the cloud.
Yeah,
a quick question related to that. Sorry, Austin. for those stories, whether they're public or not, where people have made a move back to some form of on-premise arrangement, what's the motivation? Is it always just financial, or is there other reasons why people go, you know what, it's not for us? Like, what's the story?
Yeah, great question, Matt. I don't know. I mean, again, because there's a dearth of information in regards to, to those stories. And like I said, these three that I mentioned earlier get regurgitated by almost everybody in the press. So we don't know the details. And even these ones are not really full kind of, go back to the data center. We forgot we closed our data center, so let's go and get a new data center, rack and stack everything, put VMware, vSphere on top, and start running in the old traditional way. These are not necessarily those types of stories. These people actually end up in a colo location or something like that. So because that information is not available, it's either not available or it does not exist. So I don't really know, because there's a lot of, like I said, kind of FUD put out in the press in regards to this kind of movement, but there's no evidence to actually show that it's a massive thing that everybody's doing. If people are doing it, it's probably, like I said to the earlier reasons, is because they moved in without thinking properly, or they're not optimized, in the cloud at the moment.
Yeah. So let's on some of those themes then. Let's talk a little bit about cost escalation, right? Because that's certainly one thing that we hear about, and I hear about it a lot in the tooling world specifically, right? Because when you look at hyperscaler tooling, there are so many add-ons, and everything is extra, right? You start off and you're like, oh, this is dead cheap. There's three. I'm going to measure these three metrics, and and then you start turning the next thing on, and then the next thing is based on amount of log data and things like that, and you start doing a bit of that, and suddenly it's like, ooh, which by the way is no different to some on-premise vendors, particularly in the log management space. And I think when I talk to organizations about this, I really try and get them to consider what they need over the next few years, not just what they think they need today, and try and build up a sort of total cost model over a few years. But I'm sure you've seen plenty of this, right? People having crazy shop bills and whatever. So how do you approach this with organizations? What guidance would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion is that you choose the tools that you feel are appropriate, and you do a full sort of evaluation, maybe through your Cloud Center of Excellence team that's there to really kind of guide you through the journey and make some of those decisions. And that can start all the way from choosing a hyperscaler if you don't have any particular leanings towards a specific one, all the way to the right tooling and a continuous evaluation really of those tools. There shouldn't be a kind of, okay, so we've chosen this tool and we're going to stuck with it now forever, and continue to make the tool, whether it's an automation tool, a security tool, an observability tool, or whatever it happens to be. So it should be a kind of a constant and continuous sort of evaluation of the tools that you've chosen. And then it's down to really, what your sort of cloud journey is looking like. What are your skills, and where you want to kind of invest your time. If there are tools that are kind of more automated and will give you a much easier sort of view and capability of what you want to achieve, then you can certainly adopt those, I think, initially. And then when you get a little bit more sort of detailed and learn the cloud environment that you're working in and skill up yourself and accumulate that experience, then you can certainly move to more towards more advanced sort of tooling as well. So I think the tooling needs to be consistent, but it also can vary in terms of sort of the maturity as you move along, as I said, in that journey. So initially you would look at what you have, and if you're kind of, if you're focusing on certain ones right now, and those are the appropriate ones to have, then you need those particular tools for now. And like I said, the likes of your Cloud Competency Center or your Cloud Center of Excellence, your CCOE, ought to be able to also advise you on and recommend your tool set as you move along in your journey.
And have you got like any I guess really good and really bad like car crash scenarios where they've got to the cloud, however they've got there, through planning or not, in terms of proper planning or not? Then there's like really stellar scenarios where they've properly leveraged the correct tooling for their use case versus absolutely wrong decision, everything's on fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking,
feel free to name them as well. We can name the individual companies, fine.
Yeah, I think generally from a sort of a general view would be, when you get a tool that's too complex, or it's just too complex for what you're trying to achieve, and you don't have you've not catered for, or you've not considered the amount of sort of skill that's required and the time that's required to really skill up on that, on that tool. So we can choose an automation tool or a security platform, but is that going to be the right tool for us right now for what we want to achieve? Has it got too many, bells and whistles that we don't really need right now? And therefore, hang on, we're paying a subscription for that, and we don't necessarily need that. Maybe an open source tool is adequate for that, and then we create a roadmap in terms of what do we do with that tool going forward when we get to maybe a point where it cannot scale any further, and now we're in a multi-cloud environment, or we're taking into account more sophisticated services from the cloud. Maybe that tool will no longer suffice for what we need. Then we need to kind of maybe look at something else and migrate to something else going forward. You'll see a lot of these things are have a sort of a standardized base approach. So, for example, in observability, we're seeing a lot of support for things like OpenTelemetry as a platform. So all the sort of off-the-shelf SaaS vendors are doing that. All these open source tools are doing that as well for OpenTelemetry, and that would kind of end up being a common denominator, if you like. So even if you actually change tooling, you'll still see that there is support for sort of a similar type of platform being available, continuing to be available to you. So I think it's more from a general point of view that we see kind of overskilling for those tools, or rather choosing tools that are too sophisticated for what you're trying to achieve now. And the great ones that you get, I think, are the ones that are very appropriate, and you have the skills, you have some keen members of the team that are kind of into that and make it work for you, and try to operate that as best as possible in the cloud. Obviously, a much easier one, to maybe a low-hanging fruit, would be the tools that are provided by the hyperscaler. Those are probably a lot more integrated into that cloud environment, and therefore give you more capability as well.
You've summed up one of Matt's favorite pieces there, of people who go and buy a tool that is so big it's ridiculous, when they just need, and some of that is, that's not just organizations doing that, that's vendors trying to, also tell them, hey, look, we'll do you a great deal, you take all of this stuff and then you don't use 90% of it. It does happen.
Still
happen
happens. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, it's good. So what's the biggest opportunity that organizations don't take, you think, that they should take?
I mean, generally speaking, I think it's having a fully realized cloud strategy. I think a lot of organizations I'm seeing are not really doing that. They don't really have a full roadmap, a holistic roadmap that should outlast your CTO and CIO, by the way. So anybody's kind of in and out of an organization, your roadmap and your strategy really ought to outlast individuals and groups of people and so on. There needs to be, and if you're migrating into the cloud, you're not kind of a startup that obviously is going to most likely kick off into the straight away into the cloud. If you're actually migrating your workloads, it's going to be a journey. It's going to take a long time to achieve that. There's going to be what we would call kind of migration waves. So you're not going to be able to migrate, hundreds, if not thousands of applications into the cloud on over the weekend. That's not going to happen. So it's a long journey to actually achieve that. There are low-hanging fruits that you can do and migrate those first, and then kind of focus on the more complex ones. And those that may not make it into as part of the migration, they may need refactoring, or they may need to look at something alternative like a SaaS solution for them instead or something. So that sort of cloud strategy, I think, is really important. And what I always say to customers, and this is, I think, unavoidable, is you ought to have a 1-year action plan. So what are the things that are right in front of your face that cannot be avoided in the firefighting and various other things that you have to do in the upcoming projects? Those are you're always going to have to do those. There's no avoiding those. So it needs to be an action plan for the next 12 months. So the things that you are going to do versus the things that you don't have to kind of focus on as much right now because they're maybe longer term. Have a 3-year roadmap. So this is kind of the things that you do, more actions, but over spread out over the 3 years. So by second year, we want to be kind of doing these things and things to focus on. By the third year, we want to have achieve these things, and then have a 5-year plus vision. So an ideal place of where you want to be. In 5 years, I want to have, I don't know, let's say a conservative, 25% of my workloads now in the public cloud, that type of thing. So a 1-year action plan, 3-year roadmap, and a kind of a 5+ year vision of really where you want to be. And I think if you put some milestones around all of those, you've at least got a kind of an outline of the things that you want to do. You're not always going to achieve all of those things. You're not going to be able to tick all the boxes, but at least you have something to head towards, and everybody needs to get behind that, that roadmap, that strategy.
Yeah, sounds really sensible. One thing that I always try and push organizations towards, which is not always easy in these scenarios, is what are the outcomes for your business that you're going to deliver by doing this, right? There's a lot of this stuff tends to be, hey, great, there's some great new functionality over there that we could use, and it's a quicker way for us to get our hands on it by going to the cloud. Or like we were saying earlier, lift and shift some stuff. Maybe you're trying to get out of a data center, or you want to try and get reduce costs or whatever. But having those things that you've outlined there, that 1-year action plan, 3-year roadmap, 5-year plus vision of, okay, and this is how our organization is going to be different, and what's going to look different on our balance sheet. Are we improving NPS because our customers are getting a better service, or we're going to capture some market share, or that, those kind of things that we often see. And I'm sure you see them plenty when people come out with RFPs to you and things like that, and you read them and you say, this is a load of technical stuff. How is your business going to be any different? Right. Yeah.
So what?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see, I see a lot of kind of, I think the main thing that I see is people kind of focusing a lot on the here and now, and this thing right now that we need to tackle, and whether that's a SAP migration or a 100 VMs that need to come out because the data center is being closed down or whatever, versus kind of, okay, but what does this look like when we move it over into the cloud? Are we going to just lift and shift it? Are we going to refactor it? Is there a plan to refactor it later? Maybe not right now, but maybe later on, because again, we don't want to do that and then end up incurring those costs. And by the way, those costs are, I think, a lot more visible because there is a lot more sort of itemization in terms of sort of your cloud bill, whereas your data center bill, there's a lot of kind of hidden costs that you don't really take into account. This all goes back to that sort of skepticism that I put out earlier about sort of cloud repatriation. So again, there needs to be kind of a balance on that. But clearly, as you're migrating, strategy is really the important thing. If you don't plan ahead for something, then it's right on top of you, and they're trying to sort it out, and then you don't really make the best choices. When you do that, when you're under pressure to deliver something.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so back in the tooling space, and maybe we'll do two questions in one here. Then cloud native tools versus commercial off the shelf versus open source, and also some multi-cloud considerations, I think, in there, because there is a difference, right? If you've got a single vendor kind of strategy, cloud strategy, then maybe you've got a better then hyperscaler tool might be more relevant, depending whether you've got any on-prem stuff or whatever. But once you go multi-cloud, then they are getting better, as you talked about earlier, but typically you don't get the same experience as you would with something open source or commercial off-the-shelf package or whatever. But anyway, tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, my view really is that, as I said earlier, it's kind of you make use of the tools that are the best for what you're trying to achieve, and if those are from the hyperscaler, then I don't think it's a problem making use of those, because that fits you best right now. Maybe you don't have the skills for getting your head around a sort of an open source tool or whatever, and in which case something off the shelf or from the hyperscaler as a service is adequate. So a good example is kind of database as a service, if you like, and you kind of try and make use of that, and then you maybe get a little bit more sophisticated later and saying, actually, what, that VBaaS kind of approach is a little bit restricting. I want to do these other things, and we're not able to do that with it. So let's move on to some other kind of servicing that's available. This also, by the way, works in the development space as well. So the whole sort of DevOps platform engineering is sort of kicked off in the last sort of couple of years specifically, because there's this kind of drive towards standardization and consistency in the DevOps world, whereas previously it's kind of been a wild west, really, of everybody kind of having their own preferences there. But like I said, there's a number of really good tools in the open source space, in that sort of cloud native space, and I mean cloud native as in kind of the CNCF sort of Cloud Native Computing Foundation sort of cloud native approach. So the likes of a vendor called Percona, for example. Percona do a great number of tools around that sort of whole database sort of space. So everything from and all their tools are open source, so you can go and get them from GitHub and what have you. But they have a whole bunch of tools like the Percona toolkit and monitoring and management tools. There's backup tools. You have Kubernetes operators for things like MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, various other things. So they offer a whole bunch of. Obviously, there's kind of subscriber versions of those as well, and so you get your support from Percona. But you can certainly make use of those types of tools if you're kind of in that database sort of space, and that's the sort of thing that you're trying to work on. Similarly, if you're working in the microservices space and that kind of, again, Kubernetes and observability space and networking and security in the cloud. A really good movement that I've seen recently is around standardizing around the eBPF standard, the Extended Berkeley Packet Filter standard, which is baked into the Linux kernel. So something that's actually running in kernel space, not in user space. And really, any tool can effectively API into the eBPF standard and be able to get metrics on networking, security, observability, and so on. So a good example of that is Isovalence Cilium. So Isovalence is now part of Cisco. They got acquired late 2023, and they provide a tool called Cilium, which kind of gives you this whole sort of networking security kind of approach. So again, if you're looking to consolidate, and rather than kind of having that whole sort of microservices stack with sort of networking and policy and load balancing, ingress controllers for your Kubernetes clusters, you can essentially replace all of those kind of sidecars and everything else with a tool like Cilium, which taps into the Linux kernel to make use of that. And there is, I think, a Windows version of that either available or will be available for eBPF. So even kind of the Microsoft space is really kind of conforming to eBPF as well. So those are kind of open source, cloud native stuff that you can go and approach. But to your question, Austin, in regards to multi-cloud, certainly there is that a train of thought that says, well, maybe we can abstract a little bit from the cloud. So again, that gives us a tick box in that sort of we're not locked into that cloud or the tooling from the multiple clouds, but actually we have an abstraction layer that is independent. So you could look at that from an automation point of view. You could look at that from a security point of view. You could look at that from a DevOps point of view, and certainly from an observability point of view. So, off-the-shelf observability platforms, such as Dynatrace and Datadog and New Relic and all these other kind of players in that space will give you that capability, and they can deal with and address multiple clouds. So they can even look back into your data center if you still have that. So that is certainly one of the sort of examples of kind of having an abstraction. So you're not necessarily tied into Azure Arc and various other tools, Cloud Formation for your automation and various other things from the likes of AWS. You're actually using Terraform. You're actually using Dynatrace. So you're using Cilium for your networking and security and various other things. So there is that option, I think, and I think that's a really good option to have, in that you can actually be able to abstract some of these tooling as well, and have that kind of independence. So if you do want to switch clouds, you want to open up a new cloud, you can certainly achieve that.
Good.
Yeah, we got a dog there that disagrees with the answer.
We've got a question from the dog, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to go to the question?
Whilst we have the dog, we've got a question from Omar. So, what tools do you use to achieve pay less, get more when you offer your services? Do you POC, MVP? How much weight does security have when clients move from one provider to another, or from one technology to another?
Yeah. So first question. I mean, your CCOE, your Cloud Center of Excellence, your Cloud Competency Center, whatever one you want to call it, is there to do those evaluations and those POCs, definitely. So you need to really look at kind of a number of tooling to see which one is going to be more suitable really for your requirements. And certainly there is a number of tools again that you can look at in terms of how to achieve sort of having a sort of a cost-effective, sort of cloud economics type of approach. So some people are choosing things like FinOps tools. My opinion, personal opinion, is that FinOps is a kind of a wider framework that you need to implement. There's more kind of resourcing that's required for that. There's more effort required to make that happen. So you won't necessarily see kind of a huge amount of cost savings immediately. There will be some, but it's not kind of it's kind of a longer term type of approach. However, the next layer down from that is what I would call cloud cost management. Now, this is not an industry term, but people do use cloud cost optimization and cloud cost management interchangeably. CCM, cloud cost management, I think is a good choice. And what that I think is doing is is laser focusing on specific areas of your cloud. It's not trying to address everything. It's not looking at your overall bill for the public cloud, but it's actually addressing things like your Kubernetes clusters, for example. So we look at the resources that you have created in your Kubernetes clusters. Maybe some of them are dev and test. You can switch off and so on. So great example of that is KubeCost as a tool that will look at that. It will focus on your clusters, and it will give you some cost savings, in that space. So that's a kind of a much more focused approach. And then beyond that is things like profiling. This is kind of seems to be a current thing that's actually coming in. So we're seeing a lot more sort of focus from observability vendors and just kind of startups that are doing purely profiling kind of capability. That both gives you performance sort of improvements. You can actually just improve your workloads and how they're performing in the cloud. But as a result of that, as a byproduct of that, is also cost savings as well. In terms of the security, again, like I said, security could be part of that abstraction layer that you can look at. So, things like your secrets management and your IAM and so on doesn't necessarily have to be from the hyperscaler. You could choose a third-party tool. So HashiCorp Vault, for example, or some of the other sort of tools that are available in that sort of secrets management, and having all those tools, I think, also, by the way, are backwards compatible with your Active Directory. So if you have those sort of monolithic applications that insist on that old way of kind of working, with admin accounts or service accounts or whatever, they have to authenticate with Active Directory, then those tools, those secrets management tools are capable of actually, achieving that. So in terms of security, that's what I would look at. Again, look at that as potentially as part of that sort of abstraction layer that you can have.
Cool. Thank you. Oh, Austin, you're on mute there, mate.
Right. There we go. The dogs are quiet now, so fingers crossed we'll be all right. We're coming up to the end of our time, so if anybody else has got any more questions, please drop them in the chats now. One last question I had was integrations, Richard. Mm-hmm. This is an area that I find people don't think about too much, and causes some issues down the line, right? And Matt and I were laughing recently when I went to a Gartner conference, and they put up a PowerPoint of something ridiculous like 270 tools you should be considering to manage your cloud environment, and it was nuts. And even if you took one tool from each of the 12 or 13 different sections, I was thinking, goodness me, you're going to spend your life integrating, trying to get these tools to talk to each other, and then they've got to talk to your back-end systems as well, whatever. What do you see as a good approach to that problem?
I think, as I said earlier, it's it's horses for courses. Choose the tools that are most appropriate to what you're trying to achieve right now. I mean, if you can consider a tool, and that's kind of, I guess, where cost would come in, is affordable for you to also utilize long term, then potentially that's maybe a better choice. But certainly a lot of the tools you can make use of right now would be kind of the best approach, because maybe you have the skills right now in those tools. That's kind of where you have the skills, and you don't really have the time to reskill on something bigger, faster, whatever, and sort of gain and then gain the experience. So that'd be kind of certainly an approach. Also look at, as I said, kind of those tools that are starting to collect a lot of that functionality under one roof. So things like observability tools are spreading their wings. They're looking at not just kind of the metrics, events, logs, and traces, or MELT, as I like to call it, because I can never remember those four words. But if they're looking at your sort of, they're looking beyond that as well. So they're looking at things like, application performance monitoring, the APM sort of space. They're looking at AI ops as well. So all of these used to be separate, really sort of spaces and markets. You had different vendors in them. And now that all of that's kind of really collapsed into essentially kind of your observability platforms. We're seeing also, as I said earlier, those observability platforms conforming to things like, open standards. So we've had the SNMPs, the IPMIs, and whatever of the world. That's all kind of, been under our belt for the last 30 years, and we've been doing that since the data center. But now things like open telemetry and some of these other sort of standards are coming in, and we're seeing observability integrate that as well, bringing that into its capability. So that's all great. That's kind of the sort of thing that I want to see. And like I said, if you can have a tool that can achieve a number of the functions that you require, things like Nginx, for example. And again, that's a load balancer, it's a caching tool, it's a API gateway, it's an ingress controller for your Kubernetes clusters, and so on. Again, that would work. The other thing I think to consider here, especially if you're kind of development heavy in terms of what you're doing, is the fact that APIs are appearing quite a lot as well. So if you're kind of going to be doing that type of query and writing that type of application, you also need to kind of conform to that sort of standard approach of APIs and kind of how you write your API. So looking at sort of a gateway API and so on is a kind of the type of approach I think that organizations need to consider as well.
Yeah, agreed. Wonderful. Right. So last chance for any questions, but let me just sum up what we've talked about today. So we started off talking about tooling considerations for on-prem versus cloud. And you said absolutely you need to look at things differently and have something with a real-time view. So there's a real increase in sophistication in what vendors are offering in that space. And then we looked at what's changed and what you see changing now. You said one of the biggest things is that the biggest problems people are having moving is this cultural resistance. And then there are people who are talking about repatriating, whether they are or not, and trying to really work with your Cloud Center of Excellence team to look at a good strategy for cloud, because it is the way forward, and having that 5-year plus vision, 1-year action plan, and 3-year roadmap for your journey, because it will be a journey and there will be waves of that journey, and your cloud strategy should outlast your CIO and CTO. I love that line. I'm going to nick that, I think. And then we got into some of the spaces where we talked about cloud native versus custom off the shelf and things like that. And you talked about there's being some really cool tools out there, particularly that are aligned with some of the new standards that are coming out. You mentioned eBPF, open telemetry, of course, and the names of some tools that I can't possibly say again, but they're back. Watch it back. And one thing that we have talked about before that came out 2 or 3 times today was choose things that are affordable for you, choose things where you've got skills already and are what you need right now, not necessarily what you might need in the future, because your plans might change, and that continuous evaluation process as things change is really, really important. think that's a reasonable summary. Anything I've missed, Matt?
Yeah, no, good summary as ever. That.
All right, superb. Right, so Richard, how can people get hold of you if they have any more questions, and where and why? You know, what's the ideal scenario for you, for somebody calling you and saying, "Hey, I've got this problem," or this is what I do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess, I mean, my door is always open. So, happy for people to connect with me on LinkedIn. So more than happy for that. And I do exchange a lot of messages from complete strangers, people I don't know, but we click on certain topics or whatever. So we have, some great conversations back and forth. And then I do try and make some comments as well on anything that I see in my feed. But yeah, happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. I do attend a lot of these also conferences if people kind of want to meet up and have a chat or something, have a tea or coffee or something like that. Again, you'll see me at kind of some of these sort of conferences around London and sometimes beyond as well when the time allows. And obviously, for sort of more detailed stuff and more kind of varied sort of views and talking to other people from the industry, check out my YouTube channel, Cloud Therapist. So if you just search Cloud Therapist in your YouTube app, feel free to subscribe as well. That will really help me out as well with my connections. And yeah, that's I do a lot of stuff on that. There is different types of segments that I do. There's kind of very short videos that I do. There's videos that I guarantee to be no more than 15 minutes, so you can kind of digest them quite easily. And there's kind of long form ones and some of the other live streams that I do with some of the other folks in the cloud native space.
Superb. And I'm dropping the links to some of these into the chat so that people can jump on and get to them straight away. He says he's trying to multitask, which is not something that I'm skilled at.
I can see that Omar liked the acronym MELT, so that's good. You're welcome. It's the only way I can remember those things. It's always bugged me to try and remember everything, and then I thought, yeah, how can I make that easy? Let's nice. Put it in an acronym.
Yeah, superb. Right, wonderful. Thank you very much. Again, Richard, really great having you on. Super knowledgeable. It's always great to have people that really know their stuff on. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to watching more of your Cloud Therapist YouTube podcasts, which are superb. Thank you to our audience for watching and for the questions. Really appreciate it. As usual, you can get this on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, reruns, etc., both on ours and on Richard's YouTube channel as well. If you have any questions or any topics you'd like to see covered in the future, drop Matt or I a line, or if you'd like to be a guest perhaps, then we have a couple of free slots this year so far. Yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch. But thanks everybody for watching. Take care, and we will see you all on the next one.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.